Today I'm really hyper. The world of gin is simply exciting, it's inspiring. Everything that's produced around the topic of gin, how it's technically made, how it's tasted, we'll be covering all of that in the next 2 episodes of World Spirit Shots titled The World of Gin. A very warm welcome as well to Stephan Thomé. It's great to have you with us again today.
Yes, Wolfgang, I'm glad to be here. I'm happy to be here, and I greet you from the Eifel, from our beautiful gin distillery.
Yes, I was at your place not long ago. I was totally fascinated. I know you're a technician, but you approach the topic of gin just as technically and meticulously as a precision electronics engineer, not just in your school. I was outside and I never knew there were so many different types of pepper. For our viewers, I'd of course like to announce right away, we've produced a new format called Cooking with Spirit, where we look at recipes I've created and see which products pair perfectly with them. And the first episode has already been released, featuring oysters. And for that, we used some of Stephan's products, specifically the floral selection from his samples. A really fascinating topic. But today, of course, we are focusing on the topic of gin. Everything revolves around gin, but what types of gin are there in general, Stephan?
Well, basically, the main category is London dry gin. Yes, London dry gin, we know it. Pretty much everyone does. London dry gin is a very classic gin with juniper at the forefront and a few, let's say, classic gin botanicals. London dry gin always has juniper at the front. And then in the background, you often find angelica root, maybe a bit of spiciness from pepper or a hint of coriander, and often some citrus notes as well, although sometimes the citrus notes actually come directly from the juniper. The next category, and by now the largest category, which is also where most of my gins belong, is the New Western style. New Western style is also a classic gin, but here juniper is not at the forefront. The next category, or the one that follows, is the category of Old Tom gins. Old Tom gin is sweetened. Essentially, it can be any classic gin, but it always contains a certain amount of sugar. And then we have the category for which I actually have a sample from a mutual acquaintance from World Spirits, from Thomas at the Fairy Tale Distillery in Scotland, the Navy Strength gin. Navy Strength gin always has 57% alcohol or more. In whiskey, this is referred to as so-called cask strength. Yes, and the last category that comes to mind spontaneously is sloe gin. Sloe gin is basically what we call an infused spirit. It's a gin. In my case, it's my only London dry Gin Me Eifel gin with flavors from the Eifel region, and what's typical for the Eifel is the sloe berry. You can find it everywhere in the hedges and meadows. And yes, the sloes are picked, and then the gin is basically infused with the sloes. In my case, the sloes steep in the alcohol for 6 months, and then it's refined with sugar, and that's how you get a sloe gin, basically a gin liqueur.
Quick question. The Fairy Tale with 57%, Navy Strength, why does it have 57%?
Well, Navy Strength, as the name suggests, was originally created for the Navy. But that wasn't, because the soldiers or sailors liked to drink very strong alcohol. Rather, on the ships, they didn't have the measuring equipment to determine how strong is the product I've just bought. However, they knew that if you pour alcohol onto gunpowder and that alcohol has more than 57 or more than 56%, then the gunpowder will fizz like that. If you pour alcohol on it that has less than 56%, then it burns between 46 and 56%, and below 46%, nothing happens at all. And that way, the Navy could relatively easily check that they were actually getting the product they wanted. They could also dilute it with water themselves on the ships. Yes, and I think that's a little fun fact about Navy strength gin.
Okay. From a technical perspective, we differentiate between gin, distilled gin, and London dry gin. What is the technical or production difference between them?
Well, London dry gin is always macerated. So all the botanicals are placed together in the base alcohol and macerate for a certain period of time. It can be from 12 hours up to, in my case, usually 2 weeks that the botanicals soak and macerate in the alcohol. After that, the entire macerate is put into the still, into the distillation apparatus, and is distilled all together in one go. Then there is also distilled gin. Distilled gin is essentially a blended gin. Each botanical, each ingredient is distilled separately, so each one is prepared and macerated on its own, then distilled, and afterwards they are blended together, right? We also do this with our predefined botanicals that Wolfgang has used for cooking now. We also offer courses, one-day courses, where all the botanicals are either predefined or pre-distilled, and then you can blend them together yourself using pipettes. Yes, and a classic gin is, in essence, a spirit that is flavored with juniper. That can be a distilled juniper spirit with added aromas. It can also be a distilled juniper spirit that, for example, has been distilled using an aroma basket. There are different variations. The pinnacle is the London dry gin. Everything is combined, everything is macerated together, and everything is distilled together without any post-processing, without, for example, adding sugar afterwards. And a London dry gin always has over 37.5% alcohol.
Queen Mum certainly had good taste. You said that London dry gin is the top tier, basically the Formula One. But on the one hand, you say some products are macerated for a week or two. Are some products also distilled directly? So that means pure alcohol goes into the still along with the botanicals at the same time?
Yes, of course, you can do that as well. The thing is, it's all about the variety of aromas. The complexity of the aromas comes from the length of the maceration.
So that means you also get a lot more essential oils in there. So if I understand correctly, if a product is macerated for a relatively long time, that is left to steep in the alcohol, to put it in German terms, and then distilled, you get significantly more aromas out of it. On the other hand, if a product is distilled directly in the still with the botanicals, that is, the alcohol together with the botanicals, could it be that this is more like the light version?
Exactly. It could be that this is then the light version. Also, it doesn't really make sense to macerate only briefly because the effort involved with the botanicals is there either way. So you have to put the botanicals into the alcohol, and then it's better to at least let it sit for a short while. Many people speed up the maceration by macerating directly in the still and then gently heating the macerate. The warmer the alcohol is, the warmer the base alcohol is, the faster it can extract the aromas. For example, in my case, I found that maceration with temperature changes cold warm is optimal for my gins. That's why my barrels, since I start the process in the barrel, are always kept outside summer and winter. And thanks to the day-night temperature changes we have here in the Eifel, which are quite pronounced even in summer, not light and dark, but warm and cold. So even if we have 30 degrees Celsius during the day in summer, it still cools down to 14 or 15 degrees at night. And that really benefits the maceration. That helps the alcohol extract the aromas cleanly and thoroughly.
If you look into old books that contain recipes for bitters, bitter herbal liqueurs, they also discuss the topic of cold maceration and warm maceration. So you're doing it in a modern way today, but basically it's the same thing.
Exactly.
With cold extraction, certain ingredients are leached out, and with warm extraction, other ingredients are leached out.
Exactly.
So now there's still something else I'm curious about. You mentioned sloe gin. Does sloe gin actually have to be made with gin, or can you also use neutral alcohol?
Well, I think sloe gin has to be made with gin. I'm actually not entirely sure right now. Yeah, yeah. So if you call it gin, then it has to contain juniper, and accordingly, sloe gin has to be made with gin. Anything that's not made with gin is, well, basically a bit of a fib. Yeah, so that would then be a liqueur made with grain spirit. And if in doubt, you just add 5 juniper berries, and then you also get a juniper aroma. For my part, I of course make my sloe gin with a classic London dry gin with my gin number 4.
I would say the same, but Juster, now I'm curious about something. A Western style gin? Because normally gin is defined by a clear juniper component, a distinctly recognizable juniper note. And if in a modern Western style gin, the juniper component more or less disappears among all the botanicals, is it still a gin?
Well, the traditionalists say that's no longer a gin. I say that's exactly what makes gin so exciting. That's what makes gin so sparkling. That's where the fun of gin comes from. And that's one of the gin success stories. Why has gin become so successful? It's not just about marketing. It's also because gin has ultimately become more approachable thanks to the new Western gins, to the gins that no longer have that BAM, that strong juniper note right at the forefront. Take, for example, a classic Gordon's or a classic Beefeater. They're nice, they're good, but I honestly know very few women who say, I really want to drink that. And I also know a lot of men who say, oh, keep that away from me. I don't like drinking that. And we want to open up the market. We want to have fun with drinking, with enjoyment, and also with mixing. And that's where I think the new Western gins are absolutely important, absolutely great that we have them. And yes, in my opinion, one of the gin success stories only came about because of new Western gin.
Okay, a lot of opinions for one room, but if someone is too lazy to develop a recipe, they just take great recipes, feed them to AI, and what comes out of that?
Yeah, in the best case, it's another gin. That's what we did. I let you try it when you were here. We did that last year as a gag for the opening of our gin school. You can see distilled botanicals and dried botanicals behind me here. Here in the gin school, we have over 300 different dried botanicals. Wolfram already mentioned I'd over 80 different types of pepper that we have here in jars, which can also be used for personal prototypes in the gin school. And as a gag for the opening of the gin school, we said we'd organize a little media workshop day for the press and the media. I had a few influences there, a few Michelin-starred chefs, sommeliers from Michelin-starred restaurants, in other words, people who deal with aromas, gin, spirits, wine, and flavors on a daily basis. And with them, we basically produced blended gins and distilled gins here in the workshop. And my wife had the funny idea to say, hey, why don't you upload all the over 300 botanicals you have to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to create a gin limited to a maximum of 30 out of these 314 botanicals. And this gin has been available from me since May of this year. And I actually launched it as the first clearly AI generated gin. My number 42 is a nod to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The answer to all questions, the universe and life. Is it really? I don't know. The gin is intriguing. The gin has classic notes, but in terms of aroma, it's more of a new Western gin. And the funny thing is, this gin has eucalyptus as its primary aroma. I hardly know any gin that contains eucalyptus. And I've really tried a lot of gin. So to this day, I'm still unsure. Did the AI hallucinate here? Maybe everyone has noticed this at some point when working with AI, for example, when having it write responses to email inquiries or generate customer letters or whatever else. You can use AI for a wide variety of things. And yes, sometimes it starts to hallucinate, to go off the rails, making up answers that have nothing to do with the facts, simply because that particular answer didn't exist at the time. And I don't know why my AI gene, for example, has this eucalyptus note. It has it, and it makes things interesting. But does the AI now have sensory abilities because of this, or because it chose eucalyptus? No, I don't think so. And I also don't believe that AI can replace a creator, a perfumer, or any kind of chef, because we still have a microcontroller between our ears that takes us much further than any computer can, just my opinion.
Stephan, don't worry about it. An AI is only human too.
Exactly, or maybe many people. And there's a reason why I haven't sent the AI gin to you yet, and probably never will. Because if this gin gets top marks, which I can hardly imagine it, would mean the machine is better than the human. If the gin doesn't get a good rating, we all have the answer. We've always known that. We can do it much better than the machine. Stephan, I'll leave using you in the mystery of whether we can do it better or not.
We let the AI evaluate your AI gene. There you go. Great. One more thing, you're euphoric about the market situation for gin. Very briefly, please.
Yes, very briefly. Market situation for gin. Yes, we're on the decline. That's quite clear. Actually, the entire spirit sector is declining. Whether it's vodka or I would say liqueurs, whiskey and rum are rising a bit, but not really significantly, because in Germany and Europe, consumer spending is currently declining somewhat, and gin has passed its peak. That has to be said very clearly. But that's actually a good thing, because in my opinion, a lot of designer gins have come onto the market in recent years. Two buddies thought to themselves, hey, one of them does marketing, the other, I don't know, works in sales, or maybe has some other friends who are carpenters. And then one of them decides to make a gin. You could ask AI about it, but you really don't have to. All you really need to do is throw in some juniper. And then, yeah, you have a marketing guy who makes a nice bottle and a nice label, or both. Then you have the carpenter who makes a nice wooden box around it, and then you have a great gin. Is that the way of gin? Is that the path we all want to go down? I don't think so. And I'm glad that there's now a certain market shakeout happening, that not everyone is just throwing their gin onto the market anymore, but that good products will continue to come out, that good products will continue to exist in the market. And what I'm absolutely certain of is that the gin market will never fall back to the level it was at, say, 20 years ago.
Definitely not. It's really about the inner qualities of gin. We'll take care of those inner qualities in the next episode. Stephan, thanks so much for all the interesting information. And to you, dear viewers, I would like to express my sincere thanks. I think Stephan Thomé is incredibly entertaining. He really told the story of gin in a sparkling way. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check us out again on YouTube or IBS TV. First, don't forget to like, and second, when it comes to testing, click play again on the next episode. Goodbye, take care.